Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with Galaxy's Edge co-creator Nick Cole. Nick, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's good to be on with you. We've had a pretty fun conversation already this morning. We were just getting to know each other, and they were like, we should make a podcast. So
Yeah,
it's fun.
If I ever have I do have a Patreon account, but it's not part of like this early stage and kind of the evolution of this channel. But if I had like once I start posting that, like the conversations we had beforehand would be like a Patreon, private stream.
They would definitely
lots of gold,
need to be private. You would have to be vetted as somebody the government is going to round up, and or people like, oh, I don't want to know those weirdos. But then there's a certain group of people that like, oh, I like it freaky, So it was a lot of fun baseball.
Yeah, it was fun inside baseball, but maybe sometime in the future when this channel is a little bit more well known, et cetera.
Sure.
But Thank you for taking your time to come on the show. Today we're going to talk about your career, which I think is extremely interesting because you didn't travel kind of the well-hewn path. You started out that way, but you made an adjustment, and for that, I think things have gone really well for you. So just to get folks started, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your background, bio, where you're born, your service time in the service, and then how you got into publishing in general.
Yeah, I'm a California boy, with parents from Texas and Oklahoma. And I was
like Okie, like your parents are Okies?
Yeah,
like Steinbeck
my mom's
Okies?
a Texan, my dad's an Okie, and best people in the entire world. I go back. I'm in the military back in the Cold War, which no one can relate to. So 89 to 93, a lot of good times. My favorite unit, 3rd of the 47th Infantry. Had a lot of fun, learned a lot of things. Started out in a little bit of a linguist intelligence background. Then there was no need for German linguists anymore. Moved on, but ultimately ended up getting a commission, which was fun. And that was right around Desert Storm. Then they decided it wasn't going to be the massive, war, and so that everybody didn't need a commission. Got out, went to Hollywood. Like a lot of, and this was kind of before every Navy SEAL went to Hollywood. It's like you were kind of still rare, if you were there. And so, ended up doing a lot of like background work. I was always like Secret Service on West Wing. I did a lot of student films. Learned how to actually act at the Groundlings in LA, which is like I'd taken other acting classes and done conservatory and things like that. But I was really kind of the older guy because I'd already had military experience. And then it was going to the Groundlings. Everybody, or like 50% of the people on Saturday Night Live back when it was good, were Groundlings, and then the other 50% were Second City. And so I actually learned like really good storytelling techniques there, and a method that I use with my writing partner, Jason Onspach in Galaxy's Edge, which is called the yes and method, which is really great if you're gonna work together as a team, as opposed to just normal writing, which is sitting there yelling at yourself to actually create something meaningful and then putting it up and going, this is crap. And then you come back the next day and you're like, well, it's not so bad if I fix it up a little. And then I married an opera singer and I followed her around the world. And I just kept kind of scribbling away. I wrote a Hollywood novel, and I got this agent, and he took a chance on me, and he liked Hollywood novels. He would try to sell it and it would never sell. And it was kind of like catch-20.
What do you mean? What do you mean by Hollywood novel?
A Hollywood novel is like The Player is a Hollywood novel. It's a novel set in Hollywood, and everybody in Hollywood likes Hollywood novels, but they don't sell because not everybody's in Hollywood, but everybody kind of likes it. And, Hollywood's a narcissistic kind of group of people, obviously. Johnny Hurd and Amber Depp, whatever the names are, I reverse those. But it was more like I'd written all through the military, written short stories. I read all the Joseph Heller novels, Kurt Vonnegut. So you go into writing with this idea of what you're going to be as a writer, and it's funny how it changes. So it didn't sell, and I remember this is going to sound stupid, But the Fallout video game was coming out, and I didn't have any money because I was just a broke actor. And after I'd gotten out of the military, I couch surfed a lot and had some kind of hard times. And I discovered Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. And I read that novel and it really resonated with me. And the thing I think a lot of people might enjoy reading it now rather than being forced to read it in high school is the thing that you take away from that novel is the thing the old Santiago says, the old man, is they can beat you, but they can't defeat you. And that's something I think we don't really learn until our 30s, because you're going to go out in life and you're going to get kicked around a lot and stuff like that. And you're always offered this choice of like, maybe I should stay down. But what you really need to do is keep getting up. That's what defines you. That's what makes you. So I'm laying there on my bed and I'm thinking, the Old Man in the Wasteland is really a post-apocalyptic novel. He lives in this old fishing village. He's kind of having to salvage everything like that. And I thought, what if I rewrote The Old Man in the Sea, but in a post-apocalyptic setting in the Southwest? And so I did, and I did it. I didn't actually write that novel. Instead, what I wrote is there's this old salvager. He's very much like the Old Man and the Old Man in the Sea. And he's only had one book to read for 40 years, and it's The Old Man in the Sea. And because he's been out there for 40 years, the Old Man and the Old Man in the Sea has become real to him. And he talks to him while he's out there salvaging through the ruins of America. And so I wrote that book, and I went back to that agent and I said, hey, I wrote this book, and it's kind of like, it's good. And could you publish it? And he read it and he goes, it's too much like The Road. And I'm like, well, yeah, The Road is an Oprah Book Club selection. It's doing really well. It's written by Cormac McCarthy, one of the greatest writers, modern writers. Why wouldn't you want this? I don't want it. Okay. So about that time, 2011, Amazon, Jeff Bezos has launched KDP, in which we can now bypass agents and the gatekeepers of trade publishing, and we can just put up our weirdo novel. And it's really like, the Roman arena. You can go out there and put your blood on the sand and see if you win, see if the customer buys. So I went back and I rewrote The Old Man in the Wasteland 28 times because I couldn't afford an editor. And I spent all my money on cover because later we'll learn that cover is 90% a buy decision.
Mm-hmm.
So I get it up, and the first month it sells like 2 copies. And my wife's like, because I was reading this blog called J.K. Conrad, the Newbie's Guide to Publishing.
Oh, yeah.
He'd launched in and made like $68,000 a month. And I was like, hey, there's gold in them Dar Hills, because I'm a rube. I'm a total rube. I'd have been the first guy crossing the Rockies, getting knifed by Indians, but thinking he was going to get gold nuggets, just pick them off the ground in California. So the second month it sold 8 copies. Now, those are bad numbers. But as any writer can tell you, like, when it's someone other than your mom or your best friend that buys the book, it's a person you don't know. That's a pretty cool moment. Like you feel like you've made it, and you have. You wrote the end on a book, you published it, and some rando bought it. And then the review comes in and someone says, this book has a lot of potential. I really like this book, 4 stars. And it was right there at that blush moment of the Kindle hitting the tech scene and everybody going, oh, I can read on the way into the city, and KDP, and being able to make your own revenue, being able to bypass the gatekeepers. So by month 4, it's selling 15,000 copies a month. It's just rolling. It's, for those numbers.
Well,
yeah.
Wait, so how did it go from, did you do anything to get from 8 to 15,000?
I have literally sat down and tried to figure it out and whatever. It was just the grace and mercy of God on a down and out actor. It just exploded on Amazon. It happened. Now, big publishing at that point was beginning to freak out because they knew that Amazon was starting to steal market share. And they saw that, like, there was a chick named Amanda Hocking. She was writing vampire novels. There was a guy named John Locke. There was Hugh Howey. Hugh Howey's a little behind me.
Yep.
There were some other people. And we were all starting to make pretty good money. So Big Pub came and said, hey, would you like to write for us? And because writers are needy and want to be in the club, because the club makes you feel validated, of course, I said, hey, I want to sign with the New York Yankees and be legit now. And now my book's going to go through the roof because it's in the hands of a big powerhouse publisher. It's going to be in bookstores. It's going to be on the end cap, the front table. I'm going to be on Oprah. I'm going to be at the Plaza having martinis, getting interviewed, all that kind of fantasies that all writers think. And you're a lying pony dog soldier, whatever Biden said. If you don't think that you really want that contract and that lifestyle, it's, just be honest about it. So what I learned from big publishing is they're only hoping that you're accidentally successful. They have somebody at every imprint who's carrying that imprint. That imprint that I was at, which is Harper Voyager, the person carrying that imprint was Robin Hobb. And she wrote fantasy stuff. And so then they could take a chance on a bunch of losers like me. But the main thing they wanted to do was get me off of Amazon and steal my mojo and unlock me and figure me out, blah, blah, blah. I had early positive experiences at HarperCollins, Harper Voyager. I got a Publisher Starred weekly reviewed for a book I wrote called Soda Pop Soldier. And they said, hey, you got a Publisher Starred review. And I'm like, just 1 star? And they're like, no, you don't understand. They only give the 1 star. They just do reviews. And then if they really like it, they give it a star. I'm like, well, that's good. The Librarians Critic Association, they wanted to take The Old Man in the Wasteland and they tried to sell them as individual novels. But then what they really wanted to do was put like a physical copy of all 3 in the bookstore. And I would say that they did a half-assed job with that, but they did it. And I poured my heart and soul into it, wrote 2 sequels. It never approached the numbers that I was getting on Amazon. But, and this is important for the story going forward, they offered me another contract, Soda Pop Soldier, got a Publisher Starred review weekly for that. And then they offered me a sequel to that, which would be Control Alt Revolt. So they liked me and I was doing good and they were developing me. But internally and personally, I felt a sense of contempt and hatred because they would begin to kind of look at my social media account. And I wasn't even as bad as, I'm just a normal person, but I don't necessarily support the current thing, which was coming online at the time. It wasn't like it is now, where you've got to put a monkey, circle around your face because monkeypox, and you support it, whatever it is. I don't know. So
well, it's not here yet, but by the time this interview airs, it might be.
Watch, it'll be like today, and we son of a bitch. So they asked me to write Control Alt Revolt as a prequel to Soda Pop Soldier. Soda Pop Soldier was basically Call of Duty meets Diablo. It was kind of a Ready Player One type novel. People love that novel. People love The Old Man in the Wasteland. People love Soda Pop Soldier. So I write Control Alt Revolt, and the premise was robots decide to destroy the world, and then these sort of gamers at a big game, and the novel is really Night of the Living Dead versus robots. But I needed a villain and I needed an artificial intelligence. And I didn't want to do the Matrix, humanity is a virus and the cliche. People don't destroy people because of that. People destroy people out of fear, whether people like it or not. That's why they do it. Whether you believe Putin or not, he said, we felt threatened by the Nazis in the Ukraine. And so we rolled them. Maybe it was a convenient excuse. We said, we're going to go into Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction. Generally, those may or may not be true, but the motive that appeals to the mass of society is an existential threat to your existence. And of course, humanity would be threatened by an AI that wanted to kill you. But why would the AI want to kill you? You built it. You're loving it and feeding it energy and data, which is what it wants. It's participating in managing society and all that kind of stuff. So the humanity is a virus thing didn't work for me. And so I said, well, the premise of this novel is that the AI develops self-awareness on its own. So what is something that is just being born that could feel threatened by another person and decide to kill that group of people? And I thought, well, that's kind of how the abortion issue is. Babies, they're just being born, and then someone comes and says, hey, my body, my choice, and annihilates them. And it wasn't really, it's not a pro-abortion novel or anything. I was just like, okay.
You're just looking for a motivation. Yeah. A motivation and to be clear, a motivation for a villain in your book.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. It's a villain.
You could have just as easily portray that's, without getting into where you stand on that topic, you could have just as easily argued that you're pro-choice and this is a villain and this is the tortured logic they use to, I'm not saying that's what you were really thinking, but it's reasonable to assume that could have been just as likely as the alternative.
And then you also just the modern, like we see in Netflix shows or everything like that, they go, here's the villain. Now, here's what you didn't know about the villain, and they're actually sympathetic. So I was just making the villain feel a little sympathetic. It's like it's equating it to an infant. It's like, why is he man? And the way that the AI reaches the decision point, I thought was pretty clever, and people have really liked it. I even had one really super pro-choice person write me, and they said, "You've made the most effective argument. I'm still where I'm at, but you've made the most effective argument." And it was just AI is learning about human culture, and it begins to watch reality television. And it sees some very poor choices in reality television. And it decides like, well, if these people are willing to do this and film it, then they're probably going to get rid of me. So I better wipe them out. And so that's kind of the joke. The AI wipes out human civilization because of reality television. Everybody who's
because of extrapolating human civilization,
you watch reality television, you're like, is this really us? And that's half the allure. Yeah, you guys are all a bunch of dumb hillbillies. So we're not, but sometimes reality television makes us think about our choices. So I write that, I turn it in. Now, when you turn in a novel at a major publishing corporation like HarperCollins, you'll usually they'll read it and then you'll get back notes and you need to change it. And that usually happens in the span of about 2 weeks to a month. Excuse me there. A little dry. We've been talking for hours. It's been fun. But nothing happened that summer. I didn't get any kind of notes back or anything. So by August, I write my agent. I say, hey, I haven't got any notes back on Control Alt Revolt, and the publishing deadline is November. And I already have all these people who've pre-ordered it because they put a pre-order up for it on Amazon, and they're really excited about it. So I just want to make sure it's going to happen. And so he writes me back after a day, and he says, "There's a problem with the novel." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's what the notes are for. The problem." And he goes, "They're very unhappy about the abortion." And this was right during the utter insanity of, and you got to remember, folks, you're constantly being taught to memory hole something. But there was literally a time on Twitter about, I think it was 2015, where I think it was the lead up to the Hillary election, where they wanted women to tweet their abortion and tell how it had changed their life for the better and what a positive, empowering thing it was. I don't know. I don't think I've met a lot of women, and I've met women who've had abortions, and they had abortions for reasons that were important to them. I don't know many that were proud of it or needed to get on social media and share it. But of course, a political party needed to weaponize you, so you needed to do it. So I had a editor there. Her name was Kelly O'Connor. And people have told me she had some kind of degree in gender studies. I don't know. She seemed nice enough, but apparently she was deeply offended. So offended she couldn't even talk to me. She had to talk to my agent. And the conversation was, we hate the abortion scene. It needs to be changed. And I said to my agent, well, what if I don't change it? And the agent, playing telephone, went back and he said, if you don't change it, you're done. And that was the part of me that said, wait a minute, this is just what I wrote. I shouldn't be done over this. What you should be having with me, and I thought about this much later, was a
back and forth.
A back and forth, or a conversation where you say, listen, we just have fun here. We just write here. People have hard lives. People are nurses. People are, toll booth workers. People are doctors. People are soldiers. That's what I've really learned since writing Galaxy's Edge. People come home and they just want to have fun. They don't necessarily want the problems of the world shoved in their face. And if someone would have come to me and said, like, we have a lot of women readers, many women have had abortions. Maybe this is a little too raw. It's a good point, everything like that. Maybe it's a little too raw. Would you consider changing it? And you know what? I probably would have changed it. Because at the end of the day, I just want everybody to have a good time with books. Instead, what I was told was change it or you're done. And I'm Irish enough that I'd like to see what you're done was all about. Now, also at the same time,
I know the feeling all too well, brother. Yeah, all too well.
You're done? Really? Okay. You signed up for this?
All right, let's see. Let's see
what happens. With a smile, because I'm smiling Irish. Uh, um, Also, the money wasn't good. Like when I was rolling on, the 15,000 copies a month, I was a pretty good paid writer. Now I'm here, they're giving me advances that aren't great. And I'm having to, and I went to dinner one time with my agent, and he said, I was telling him about people on Amazon.
Well, actually, let's quantify, and you don't have to respond to this, but if you're selling 15 copies a month and you're making, I don't know, $3, $2 to $3 a copy,
Right.
you're making 30 to 45K
Yeah.
a month.
Right. I had, because at that time I had the royalty rate set to a different setting, so it wasn't quite
Okay.
that much. But for me, being a broke, out of work actor who might make $1,500 on a commercial or $75 for Shakespeare in the Park, this was like steady, life changing money for me, and it was a road to somewhere, which is what you want. It was well, if I do another book, is that like? But with publishing, I sat there with my agent and I was saying, like, I know these two guys, and they're paying off their parents' mortgage on their indie book sales. And he just said to me, he goes, "No one makes a living in publishing. Everybody has another job." I'm like, "But I know people who are actually making a living in publishing." And I was basically arguing, they're not doing enough. They're not creating hits. They're only just hoping that you will be accidentally. It's very much the record company label of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Let's just throw everything out there and see what a hit is. Because no one wants to take the time to understand what people want. Well, what people didn't understand, and what big publishing didn't understand, is the algorithm knows everything about you. The algorithm knows exactly what you want. And if you're willing to write to market, you can read people like Chris Fox, their book, Six Figure Author. He was a data scientist in Silicon Valley. He started writing books. He really breaks down how to effectively publish. I won't go into that. Chris Fox, Six Figure Author, check that out. You really can make money selling books. And so I missed being an indie. And so now they were saying, "You're done." And I'm like, "Well, you think I'm done, but I know where I can go. I can go back to where I was actually making money. I can go back to Bethel," as religious people say. So I said, "Okay, well, I'm a writer and I have high-minded values, and you're not changing my things. I'm sorry this marriage isn't working out, Amber Heard. I must go." And so I left, or they fired me, really. And that agent hung with me for a while, but then he was super.
By the way, is that editor still working at that
I think
company?
I don't keep tabs because I'm just not a stalker, but I had seen one time where she still was, but she seemed a little too precious for work and things like that. So I don't know. I'm sure it all worked out. I'm sure she's a mighty girl and she's saved the universe. I think HarperCollins is doing so well that Amazon is collapsed and Jeff Bezos had to sell one of his super yachts. No, that has not happened. Big publishing is nothing more, really, honestly, 5 years that you could look at. Big publishing is nothing more than a wealth redistribution scheme to people who say the right things, and mainly political figures who will cross party lines or do things. It's amazing how Mike Pence can get a really great book deal when he would have never gotten a book deal in his life. And you can almost say that about every courage of their conviction politicians. Big publishing is Hillary's book sits in Salvation Army stores stacked like little play forts. No one buys it, but the money is sent. So it's a con. You really want to write books and sell books? Go to Amazon. And then people can say, "I really hate your prose. Oh, and then I looked up your profile on Twitter, and you're just such a foul right-wing ultra MAGA bigot," which I'm not, "that I hate your guts. I won't buy them." But then you see all these other people who say, "You like writing about the military, and I like guns and you like guns. I think I'm going to read all your books." And then, it's the big arena where people can just find you. But at Big Pub, my friend Larry Correa was pointing out, we'll get to that in the Control Alt Revolt story. He was telling everybody, because of his personal experience, and I think he's talked about it on the show, he was saying there was a left-wing bias in publishing, and they were gaslighting us and saying, "No, there's not. You're just not good. Get good. Learn to code," is what they were saying. So I rewrite Control Alt Revolt 60% more bitter. And I really say all the things I want to say because I'm going back to indie publishing. And this guy, a friend of mine, Jewish guy, he's coming out to LA to do something. And I say, "Hey, let's go get a hot dog." And he's a really nice guy. He's a big fan of the books and he's a writer too. I won't mention his name because He is active in the political sphere. And so we go get a hot dog, and I tell him my story because he was when's Control Alt Revolt going to be out? I love Soda Pop Soldier. I'm like, oh, this terrible thing happened, but I'm putting it out on my own. In fact, it's coming out tomorrow. And he goes, really? And I go, yeah. And he goes, would you tell that story in a private group? And I'm like, okay. So I went home and I basically wrote an article. I said, I'm just going to publish this in here because my friend asked me to publish it so you guys would know. And I don't really think anything. In fact, what I'm thinking is, if I ever thought I was going to get back onto the big publishing team, and you have to understand, when you get picked up by Big Pub and you've read Ernest Hemingway and Kurt Vonnegut and all the greats, you really do feel like you're getting signed by the Yankees, not the Devil Rays, not the Angels. You think that you're involved in one of the greatest American institutions of your life, and you're a part of it. You're just a minor player. You're just a, David Wells, but you're a super fan, like David Wells was of the Yankees. And you're sick because you think, well, they hit me and they smoked me and they threw me out and they beat me. But maybe someday I can earn my way back into their love. I mean, it's like,
yeah. So you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah,
right?
You're saying there's a chance. It's like people who've been in domestic violence will tell you this is how it works. So you're like, okay, but you and I are Irish. We're not going to take it. We would fight a Tyrannosaurus Rex knowing we were going to lose because that's how stupid the Irish are. It's just the point of we're going to fight. So
yeah, to make a point, just to make a point, we'll sacrifice our lives just to make a point.
I could go back to acting with this face. So, no, it's a terrible face. So, I said, all right, I'm keying the boss's. If I publish this article, I'm keying, and I publish this book, I'm keying the boss's car on the way out the door. I'm done. And I said, okay, I'm fine with that. And I also had the same thought of like, do you really want to do this? Because there is a legitimate story to be made, even though they never made it. Because I'm a human being and I'm compassionate enough, which is what I find with a lot of people on the right, which is why the left was allowed to take over educational institutions that were like, USC starts off, their motto is "The Lord is my light." USC now is full left wing. Every education is, because those people who are right wing or conservative or Christian or whatever, they made room to hear other voices. So there I am going like, you realize that there are some women who've had abortions and they just want to read a book and they're hurt by this. And maybe they don't need it. And I'm like, yeah, but no one came to me. I had to make that argument to myself. So it's just one chapter. The rest of the book is Night of the Living Dead meets zombies, and it's fun. There's even a Bruce Campbell type character. There's a hot Brazilian chick. It's goofy fun. It's like, it's super goofy. It's not a serious novel, but it's a lot of fun. But I said, okay, I'm doing it. I'm keying the boss's car out the door, and I'm understanding those things. I'm done. My career's over. I'm never going to be published again. Yeah, I can go back to indie. I got a hit once, and the reality is most hits are lightning in a bottle. We all want to think that we can reproduce hits. It generally doesn't happen statistically. You get your shot. That's it.
Well, let me interject with that. Like, and by statistically, it's in the media, in venture capital, in book sales. You are not looking at a Gaussian, like a normal curve distribution. You're looking at something called a power law distribution, or like a Pareto effect to explain land holdings in rural Italy back in the 18 or 1900s, which is a very small percent. So in venture capital, as an example, about 5% of the dollars that you invest in in various companies returns 60% of the value. Publishing is a similar power law. So there's a skewed effect. That's why you only see, George R.R. Martin, like he is not the norm. He is the 1% that generates whatever,
but even him, he's just like, he wrote so much that no one knows about. Then he wrote this thing, and he hasn't written anything since. Tom Cruise is the exception to the rule.
Exactly.
But everybody now, J.K. Rowling. Well, Harry Potter generates the amount of money. I like her detective series. No one knows about it. So it's you get lightning in a bottle. And I really had that with Old Man on the Wasteland. It really was a phenomenon at the time. So I wasn't really expecting anything else. I was realizing I was keying the only viable way of being on the Yankees. I was out the door. So I published it in this thing. And it just so happens that Larry Correia is a kind of secret member in there. And he says, aha, this is exactly what we've been saying. There's a left-wing bias in publishing. They wouldn't publish this book, not because it's not good or doesn't have merit or doesn't tell a good story, but because it says something that we disagree with, which is that if aliens looked at us and saw that we annihilated our young, they might not necessarily think too highly of us. That's just a fact, so they didn't like that. So they want, I was just using it as a device to entertain. And they said, no, you can't entertain that way. You have to entertain the way that we say. And I'm like, well, we all know that's not going to happen. So Larry has a lot of power. Larry at that point went and dropped that. He's like, can I republish the article? I'm like, okay, well, I've lit everything else on fire. Why not? And so he does. And it goes nuts. Like it just
was this recent? Was this a recent time?
This was like 2015. And
this was the first time. Because he reshared it. That's how I became aware.
Yeah, he reshared it recently, but on my original blog where I had the stats, like it went like so viral. It got like 40,000 likes and it was just huge. The Passive Voice, which is a lawyer in New York who comments on literary matters and opines on his opinions and things like that. He talked about it. He says, he goes, this is the problem with New York. He's like, most people understand New York is a small town. It's as small-minded as a small town out in the country. It doesn't understand the rest of the culture, which, resonates with this issue. I got opposition researched by the New York Times. They called my editor, who was a female, and she's like, they're asking me if, you've ever been abusive to women or hit on me. And I'm like, well, tell them the truth. And she's like, no, you're a really nice guy. So like, they weren't asking like, is it a good book? How is it working with? They're like, give us the dirt. Tell us what a horrible person he is. And it's like, well, you could, everybody's a horrible person. Ask my mom. She'll tell you my worst fault. She's Irish mom. They'll let you get away with shit, So it's, so it just went nuts and it went viral within the community, and people would write me and say, I bought your novel. I'm never going to read it, but I bought it out of spite because I hate them so much. And I'm like, okay. And what that kind of taught me is kind of before that time as a writer, and I would have even told you that I was a right-leaning author, a conservative. I'm constitutional, not a Republican. I'm a constitutional conservative. I believe in conserving the things that work. I believe in the Constitution. A lot of people who are uninformed think that means that I'm a Republican or whatever because they hate the Constitution so much. It's like, you don't understand, like, what I believe gives you the power to believe what you believe. It's I don't want you erased.
But it doesn't seem to be about that anymore. It's no longer about, I don't think anybody, let's just straw man it a little bit, but I don't think anybody on the far left would argue, well, no, they might say that, oh, you're not using school money to purchase this particular book anymore because in your curriculum you want to demonstrate it with a different book. They call that, they'll call that like book banning, which it's really not. Nobody's saying you can't read this book. They're just saying we're going to fund a different book. Now, you can argue whether or not that is a good thing or a bad thing, right? But at the end of the day, a local school board should have the ability to decide what's in their curriculum.
Right.
But I think the general point though is it's less now about whether or not everybody has a voice. It's more about, we don't want you saying these things because it's offensive to us. Right. Therefore, our objection is what you're saying should not be said.
Right.
Rather than we don't have a voice.
Yeah, exactly. Going to COVID, everybody says, I think it's just a flu. And you get a disinformation warning. Bill Gates comes out a month ago and says, I think it was just a flu. It's a group.
Well, even the lab leak theory, right?
Yeah.
Like, when you say, well, there's a wet market, it's a block away from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is the only class 4 biocontainment facility in all of China, which focuses on novel coronavirus research. But no, it's at the wet market, and the virus had to jump from a bat to a penguin and then end up on somebody's dinner plate. And therefore, that's the more legitimate theory. To even suggest that, hey, perhaps it just like escaped from the lab where they study coronavirus research. If you said that at the beginning of the pandemic, you were a racist.
Yeah, I think anybody should be able to say anything that they want, and yeah, even some ridiculous shit. Because what will happen is that it gets proven wrong or whatever. What scares me and what I see in the culture now and what I was beginning to see in the Control Alt Revolt debacle is a group of people who said, you can't say those things anymore. And it's like, that's not America. That's not supported by the Constitution. I want everybody, even the people I disagree with, to say their things. And then I'd actually, you know what I like is actually to talk about it. I might be convinced about things. You might be convinced. But we've entered a new space where it's just. I think you're just going to see an amplification of you can't talk about anything that we don't want to talk about. And one of the great things about being a writer is that listen, philosophy comes at you in three ways. It comes at you in academia, and most people don't ever really get to that level or enjoy that level. People who do, they become philosophy majors and they talk nonsense. As the old joke goes, how do you feed a family of four with a philosophy degree? You deliver pizza. So it's the other way that philosophy comes at you is sitting around the kitchen table with your family, and you guys talk about life issues and you begin to develop how you're going to approach life. Both of those methods aren't really super effective because you can tell your kids all you want about how bad a smartphone is. And when they get around their friends, the entire culture is built around the smartphone. It's sexy and attractive. The real way that philosophy comes at us is through story, through media. And it's a great way for people to sit down like Heinlein did with Starship Troopers and advance his weirdo ideas about the military being the only people who should ever be able to vote. And you can kind of game it out. And some people can say, it's actually not a bad idea. And some people can say,
I've actually on this show, very dangerously, I might add, when I was interviewing Joel Presby, I started saying, I don't really think it's given everything that's transpired since 2016, I don't think it's a bad idea. And she kind of looked slightly horrified, but I'm like, because it's been, anyway, I don't want to get into it.
Well, I mean, which would you rather have? Let only military people vote or let people in South America vote? It's like both are kind of like in a certain way bad ideas. But what we're being told now is, well, our idea is not bad and your idea is. And so our idea, and I just don't like that. And so what the science fiction author, what the writer can do is they can, I hope, winningly and entertainingly being the first priorities, advance things that they think would be interesting to discuss. And you can kind of work those out in the novel. And if you do that honestly and faithfully, and you give the other side fair representation to make their arguments in your book, which means you gotta go learn it, then what you find is a very entertaining novel. When you just straw man stuff and say, and like Netflix, and say, oh, look at this evil corporate villain with Trump's hair. He's so dumb in the newest Star Wars movie. Oh my gosh, Mighty Girl defeated him. No box office sales. No one likes it. Just be honest and have fun. So it basically it gave me a second life in indie publishing, which was where I was happiest. I partnered with a young guy named Jason Ansbach, and we looked at the Star Wars brand. And we saw, like most people don't understand about Star Wars, that there were the movies, and between the first movies and then the second set of movies, not the third set of movies, the second set of movies, there was a huge 20-year gap. And during that time, like the Latin monks of the Dark Ages Catholic Church, the story of Star Wars was kept alive in novel form. And so all kinds of things happened. A moon got dropped on Chewbacca. Luke Skywalker married a chick. All kinds of stories. And the Star Wars faithful kept telling their children, someday the movies are going to come back and this is what you're going to see. And it's going to be beautiful. And you're going to see why I like it, And what happened is Disney bought it. And their first move before they even shot a frame was all that stuff never happened. And so the Star Wars faithful, and they're big, they said, but this was our religion. This was what we invested our money. This is our cult. Everything's a cult. They said, "This is what we believe in," and now you're telling it's all meaningless. Like it was very ham-fistedly handed because there was an agenda with the new Star Wars movies, as we know. So a lot of them said, "I'm never reading another Star Wars book again." And my partner and I, we were sitting around, and we had just worked on a project that had collapsed. And he said, "I don't know what to do." And I said, "Well, what do you like?" And he's like, "I like Star Wars and G.I. Joe." And I said, "Well, write Star Wars and G.I. Joe." And he's like, "I can't write Star Wars and G.I. Joe because they've already been written as Star Wars and G.I. Joe." And I said, "Yeah, that's true. You can't write Luke Skywalker and Snake Eyes. But what you can do is you can borrow from those elements, and you can, just like you played with action figures in the dirt when you were a kid, because he had collected a lot of action figures." I said, did you reenact the movies, or did you make up your own?" And he's like, "Well, I made up my own." I'm like, "Well, just do that. Just make up your own movies with characters that are like those characters, or the tone and feel and look of a Star Wars style sort of industrial universe, or, a group of high-speed, highly motivated operators that are more like G.I. Joe than, your average infantry platoon, that kind of thing." I said, "You could do that." And he goes, "Well, would you do it with me?" And that's always the problem. I wasn't the guy's mentor, but he was just asking me for advice and things like that. And then sometimes when you give people advice, you're kind of like, "Okay, well, let me help." Like, you teach somebody how to bust a tire, then you've got to kind of help them bust the tire to get it right. And so I'm like, "Okay,
Right.
I'll help you." And you can ask my wife, I'm like, "This is going to be another failure." This is what a positive motivational thing. "Oh, this is going to be another failure." And I'm like, "But I'm helping him because I like him, and I want him to, I felt some responsibility." So we write it. And then we meet a friend of ours named Richard Fox, who is a military intelligence guy who was in Iraq. Great guy, great series of books, the Ember War series books. And Richard,
Yeah, he's actually been very successful on the
yeah,
indie scene, right?
yeah, he's very successful in the indie scene. And so Richard and I have dinner. And he's like, "Listen, the model in publishing has changed. They don't want novels anymore. They want series. And so I know you guys are getting ready to drop the series, this novel, but could you make it a series?" So I go back to Jason, and I'm like, "Hey, let's glue together what we have, and then let's commit to getting on the back of the Tiger, and let's rapid release." "Well, what does that mean?" "We release a book every month." He's like, "Wow, it's incredible." I'm like, "Okay, but these guys are seeing these numbers, and there's only about 10 military science fiction cons in the Mongol horde that is military science fiction on Amazon." And here's the other thing: unlike romance or lit RPG, they don't hate each other's guts. They actually work together and try to promote each other's books with mail lists and flip and, and stagger their releases so they don't step on each other. Because they're military, they've learned to work and plan together effectively. And they'll let you in. That's what Richard Fox will help you. I'm like, "Oh, okay." So we jump on the back of the Tiger and we write ourselves crazy. Like, we break a little because we're writing so much. But Galaxy's Edge.
Yeah, let me stop you right there. Like, how do you write that? Like, so I'm assuming that each of you had to produce a novel every 2 months because there's two of you.
Right.
Is that
We were producing,
how do you write that
the
fast?
same novel together at the beginning. So we would take alternate story arcs, and then we would glue them together. And sometimes there were fun mistakes, but we got it fixed in editing. Or the fan base, like, we also started a subscription method, and that was Jason's idea early on. And because there were people that just wanted early access, like, as the chapters were written, they just supported it. They loved it. It started out with like 12 people. And now it's a pretty significant number, 1,000 people. And our goal is to grow it to 10,000 within the next 5 years. So what we're switching to now is feeding the subscribers more than we actually feed the sort of industry at large, because we think that's really the way to go. But the subscribers turned out to be our friends and believe in us. And they would read things for us and help us catch the errors writing so fast. They became kind of like partners. Now watch Class Action Lawsuit. They became partners in it. And we owe, just thanks to God, a lot of our success to them. So now we've kind of modified that a little bit, in that we'll work on separate books, and then one will read the other. Sometimes one we'll go back to the old method, but the main thing is we do whatever it takes to keep the release stream constant every couple of months. Now we're moving into every week, because we're not there yet. We're at every month now, maybe 2 a month, but we're now we have like a staff of 12 people now that work for us. And so what we do now is we recruit writers that we like, and we develop them, and we have them write a series, and then we begin to launch their series. And then our big move this year is we started producing our own audiobooks. So we get a bigger cut of the royalties with Amazon there. And we also can sell
when you say
our website.
When you say series, do you mean like a Galaxy's Edge series or their own? Okay,
like their own. Like we started out where they wrote some side books, but what we found really is we want to develop their IPs and have them write at least 3 books in the IP before we start launching. Because what we found with writers is they have no faith in themselves. And what they do is they want to write a book and then have someone tell them it's good. And then they're like, okay, once enough people tell me it's good, I will write a sequel. It's like, well, here's how the algorithm works. For 30 days, you're hot. For 60 days, you're half hot. At 90 days, the algorithm no longer markets you. You're dead. So if you publish the book and then people read it, and by the end of the month, you decided I should write another book. Most writers write slow. That next book doesn't come out 6 months to a year. You've killed the first book. You have no algorithmic wind. So really what
do you have them like pre-write 3 books and then launch,
and then we drop them all within like
60 or
what? Sometimes we've done them, I think, at 15 days. I think right now we're at 30 days. So we'll drop 3 books over the course of 90 days. And that really seems to work for the algorithm. You know, and you drop the first book and you've already got pre-orders up for the second and third book. So Amazon has a buy all button. If someone likes the first book, and this is what we find, they actually will go through and just buy the whole series. Because because of the Netflix model.
That's right, because you could pre-sell them. You could pre-sell them so they know they exist. Yeah. Therefore, also the buyer's more likely to hit the click button because they don't have to worry about I'm just going to throw it like the George R.R. Martin problem of like the series is not done yet, and not to pick on him, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing you cannot violate. But you know, I think if you do 5 to 6 books, that's a good conservative series that you'll make some pretty good money at. I would tell most people, like, if you pursue this method within 3 to 5 years, you will have replaced your income. There are some people that can get like a hit right out of the box, but the main thing is there has to be a road to somewhere for the reader. They're no longer interested in short stories or collections or anthologies or single novels. That's the purvey of big publishing, convincing everybody that this latest novel is the hot novel, and that's all you need. And if you like this novel and everything like that, well, in 3 years, this author, she might have another novel. But literally, like when I wrote Old Man in the Wasteland, I was ranking higher than Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones was like 2 or 3, I was 1. And I have written 25 novels since then. And he has written none novels since then. He's always writing. He's always at conventions. He's always at the Oscars. He's just never actually producing any books. Me? I sit here and produce books.
Yeah. I mean, Larry does it through traditional publishing, but Larry Correa is also
Larry's model really is close to indie. I mean, he really is Bane, but Larry starts out as a gun guy, and he's going to gun conventions and gun ranges, and he just writes the stories as, I won't say as a goof or whatever, but like it's his culture. And they buy them because they like Larry. And then they find out they like the stories. And so Larry is the king of marketing and hand selling and being an author who is actively engaged in his audience and a member of the audience. What you see in so much of and now I got to attack my own people, my own tribe. What you see in Amazon sometimes are people who go, hey, space wizards are hot. Let's all write space wizard novels. And then you get a bunch of space wizard novel crap. You really got to write.
Like you got to just write what you love, and sometimes it'll hit, sometimes it won't.
The algorithm will find your tribe for you. But here's the final thought, and then maybe we'll wrap this podcast up. And unless you got some questions. But the final thought I would give to you is, be careful when you wish for success, because when you get success, you're trapped. Like, don't be Diane on Cheers. She like Shelley Long. You're probably too young for that. But like
I remember who Diane from Cheers is, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to need more to understand
on
the Trapped by
Cheers,
Success.
and she decides to go be a movie star, and it doesn't work out. And that happens to a lot of actors. You know, like you're making money here, you're doing really great, and then you think you can go somewhere else and do it, and it doesn't. So when you sit down and write a novel, like let's say your novel is Bigfoot, but he's a detective and he solves crimes in Wyoming, and you're like, I don't know why, this is just the goofiest thing in the world, but I love it. I guarantee you'll find an audience, but you better love it so much that you want to write it ad nauseum, because here the readers come to you and they go like, we published a Galaxy's Edge or Forgotten Ruin novel, which was our second series, which is Rangers in D&D, aren't U.S. Army Rangers in D&D or Tolkien. And they literally come within 24 hours and say, when's the next book? When's the next book? When's the next book? This is how we pay our bills. This is how our kids get braces. We can't quit now. They wouldn't let us. We can't say,
you're in the hamster wheel. Right.
Yeah, I really have always wanted to write my coming of age 1980s less than zero lavender and croquet wedding death novel. No, they want to read about dudes stacking corpses, either in Space Marine world or D&D world. And that's your tribe, and you better love it. And thankfully to Jason and I, we love it. You know, we love the military community. We are part of the military community. And this is like, you know, it's like being a pig in shit.
So I kind of have one statement and then one last question. So the statement is as follows, and this is something that we can tantalize the audience with. If you approach what you're talking about with intention, and by when I say what you're talking about is developing a series that you have to reliably produce copy for. If you approach that with a long-term mindset, which is not just about the books and producing the books, but developing a brand based on the books, you can, if it is successful, start to do what you're doing, which is franchising a little bit, right? Like the James Patterson model.
Yeah.
And if you can kind of aim with that over the long haul, that's when your product starts making money when you sleep, right? I mean, it is initially too, but that's when you can really grow and really expand, when you develop a brand. And not only that, you also have merch. You have, you don't have a Galaxy's Edge YouTube channel, do you?
What we do is we serve the insiders. So after I get off this podcast and write some chapters, I have to jump on that podcast. So when you subscribe to Galaxy's Edge, you get all the novels as they're released. You get a bunch of free novels that we've made available. You get discount on all our merch, which literally we've had operator teams run into each other, spot each other's tags on their plate carriers and go, oh, you read GE. So it's very that community. So then on Saturdays we jump on and we do a serial that we've already written, that we record ourselves, and we even make mistakes and call ourselves out on the mistakes, but they just like us. Go figure. I don't know why. And then we get together and we do like an hour conversation. Jason's really funny because he's got this great dry sense of humor, and he's very down to earth. And then obviously you either like me or hate me from this kind of conversation, but we'll just have a conversation for them, and they love it as part of their life. So I could give to YouTube, but if you could go over to Twitter and kind of see my account, and you could figure out who I am. I'm probably the kind of guy that's going to get us demonetized on YouTube. I don't hate it. Like I said, I love everybody. I just say shit that pisses certain people off, and I'm cool with that. But so we know that's going to happen. So we've worked around that. We realize that we're not for everybody. And then they pay us $10 a month to be, to get all the free books, to get the audio books, to get the merch swag discount, which is like awesome. Like, hey, this is a good merch one. Look at this hat. KTF.
Very nice.
KTF means kill them first. You will literally see these patches on operators' carriers. It's really cool. We have cool merch.
I actually thought it meant something else. I thought it meant like kill but
I think Jason, who has a theological degree, I think he started off with it's keep the faith. And then the military guys go, hey, it means kill them first, and so they dug it. And it's just it's such a fun phrase that we had to copyright it, and it's really worked.
Well, every time I think of like I mean, again, I'm Irish, so don't
Yeah.
blame me. Every time I see it, I just automatically like translated it into "kill the effers." So
It's yeah. Yeah. It's what you know what? I don't like that's the thing.
It's good to know that I was wrong. Well, actually, I'm a little
no,
disappointed that I'm wrong.
You can play with your Boba Fett however you want to play with it. You don't need to play with my you'd go over to some kid's house and they're like, "Hey, we're gonna play with my toys." You're like, and you go, "You're not playing with them the right way." You're like, okay, that's me and Jason. Actually, he'll be like, "Hey, maybe we could just put the action figures up and look at them." I'm like, "Hey, maybe we could light them on fire." So guess who kills the most characters? Me. But so we do all that and we have fun with that, and we made the fundamental shift. I made a fundamental shift. I didn't want to know writers anymore because I've seen writers get together and blacklist people or be mean to people. Go over to romance, they crucify each other, and writers don't buy other writers' books. They actually hate your success. But readers, if a reader comes to town, I will go to coffee with them. If a guy is forward deployed and I put like a Reaper patch on from Strange Company, he's like, "Oh, I got to get one from me." I'm like, "No, it's coming to you right now from me. You have mine." We just had a knife incident because we make our own knives. And one guy said, "Oh, my knife kind of came back broken." I'm like, "I'm sending you my knife first." And it's just like and that guy's a Marine. That's just the fun of having that community. I can't speak for everybody to have, if you're going to do Bigfoot Detective, I don't know that you're going to get a community as cool as mine, but I bet it's going to be a fun community.
I guarantee it'll have some character.
Right,
so my last question.
The mindset of just being with the writers, like Larry, readers, being in the tribe. Yeah.
All right. So last question,
Yes.
and this is more about we watched. You talked about the evolution of Amazon, and you didn't really mention it, but this was the big part of it was the evolution of the ebook, which also was terrifying for publishers because they thought people would stop buying physical books, which is not the case. What opportunities do you see with the most recent evolution, which is the Brandon Sanderson $42 million Kickstarter campaign, and how that is a potential pivot, or because I imagine publishers are looking at that, and Sanderson's looking at that as like, wow, publishers probably undervalued me by this much. Like, what am I doing? So how do you think that's going to evolve in your thinking and just in the industry in general?
I have a lot of thoughts on that, and I would just say that I have noticed in publishing that certain people of certain identities have begun to have more opportunities. And I've known that other people of other identities, even if they were big name salespeople, seem to be making alternative choices. So Brandon Sanderson was a very big published author, if you know his history, and sells like a powerhouse. Now, Forgotten Ruin ranks in the same category as his. And it's his books and then our books at the top. And we're behind him. Like, he is a powerhouse. So why did he do that?
Maybe because he's scared. Maybe because he's scared. He's hedging.
And why do I see
it's portfolio diversification, right?
That I have big series, and suddenly they're making deals with smaller publishers or smaller audio publishers. I won't name their names because they get in trouble. But if you look around, I think you can see that some people are being told, well, I was told by a major corporation with the GE series, and they liked us and they were promoting us, and they said, "It's not your time now. It's their time." So let's just keep that as broad as possible. I think that Brandon was being told,
but we all know what you're saying. We all know.
And right. Like I've said this to people, just because you wish someone away to the cornfield doesn't mean it happens. So Brian has a huge base, and they're smart, and they just said, well, there's this thing over on Kickstarter. We'll pay anything for your stories. And that's the thing, that the people making the decisions who are doing it because they feel that society would be a much better place if they made these decisions. And I want to have that conversation. I want them to be able to say those things. I don't disagree with them. I want both of us to have a topic about it. But what they're saying to people like me, or they're saying to people like Brandon, is they're saying, it's not your time right now. But the market is saying, but I'll pay anything. And that's what I find, like with our readers, there are people that don't buy the merch and don't even read the books in the Galaxy's Edge subscription method. They just want to support it. And then they wait till it comes out, and then they like to put it in that library as opposed to our library or whatever it is. But what you find with and I don't like the term fans, like super readers, our friends, is, and every writer has them, no matter how bad you are, you will have 3 to 15 people that if you say, hey, I got a body to bury, they will show up with 2 sacks of lime and ask you what you want from the Starbucks on the way. Like, they just really believe in you. And it's a great thing. Mm-hmm. And if you take the time to really communicate, and this is the thing that came out of HarperCollins. I would sit through these marketing classes with them, and they would say, we went back and asked all the old school writers who were successful, the overheated 70s and 80s ones, before social media, how did they engage with their readers? How did they sell so many books? And they said, every time someone wrote us a letter, we wrote back to them. Well, that's what we do at GE. And so we're not like, everybody liked my Instagram channel, I'm a superhero, blah, blah, blah. We always, like, our mindset at GE is the readers are the heroes. So I could go into a lot about that, but I won't. But yeah. So what I see in the culture is they were telling people, it's not your time. And then they just said, because we own the bubble, because we own the machine, you kind of have to take it. Yeah, maybe Brandon's going to publish 1 novel this year, but there's a couple other slots going to people who haven't had their chance because they have the right identities. And so Brandon's fans said, yes, if you will publish the novels you were going to publish, we'll buy direct from you. That's all that happened that started it. What happened is Brandon Sanderson single-handedly ended big publishing. It'll take a few minutes, but he J-damned them. It's done because he proved that the market is actually who pays you your money, and the systems like even more than Amazon, because all you got to do is set up a book funnel, and you can set up an audio funnel, and you can if you have a group of people who believe in your work, they will pay you for your work. There's another author who was banned from Amazon named Michael Scott Earl. He does the same thing. People are beginning to understand that you can go directly to the market and they will buy from you. Now, what does Amazon do? It introduces you to the market. It's a great, effective tool to introduce to the market. That's what Big Pub was supposed to do until they got into the game of picking the winners and the losers. And they didn't pick the winners and the losers based on merit. They picked on the winners based on reward, Mike Pence's book deal, and identity politics. Whether the book was good or not, it was written by this identity. And if you don't read it, then you're a bigot. Well, that's as bad as saying, if you don't read Control Alt Revolt, then you're a pro-choice, horrible, awful person. No, it's just for fun. It's just for fun. I'm sorry there's some things that offended you in there. People were offended by Mark Twain. People were offended by all kinds of novels. We're just trying to have fun. All that Brandon Sanderson's audience said was, we would like to have 4 times more fun. That's all he gave them. 4 more novels. Yep. You could have it in audio. You could have it in ebook. You could have it in physical copy. And if you were a super fan, and apparently there were a lot of super fans, you could have all 3 formats because you love Brandon so much. And if you follow Brandon, he loves them. He, like, you ever seen a signing warehouse where they got to bring him in for 3 days and they just love him. And so he said, well, because you guys love me, I'll bust my ass and write 4 uncommitted novels. And they said, okay, we'll give you some money. And he said, I'll probably make $2 million. I made $42 million. But what he did is he J-damned publishing, because now all the other writers who have audiences are going to do it. J.K. Rowling needs to do it now because they're trying to.
Yeah, I'm already seeing it. Like Martin Shoemaker, as an example, is already running one right now on a project that he has.
Yeah, I'm getting my partner and I are getting ready to set up one for Forgotten Ruin, and we're going to just do it the same way that Brandon does. We don't have his audience, but we have a very big audience, and it's just water goes where water goes. That's it.
It might not be the right identity, but it's still 60% of the population. And if you ignore 60% of the population, you're just leaving money on the table. I think publishing will adapt, because if they don't, they're going to die. Right. And again, I think addressing the broadest possible audience for people who didn't think they have a voice in the past is also a noble goal. But do it at your own risk, in terms of you can't ignore the broadest possible market. Like the best books, regardless of identity, regardless of whatever your ideology is, are the books that reach the largest possible or potential audience, and that comment on the common aspects of humanity that everyone, regardless of race, creed, religion, ideology, experience. And I think it's noble to be able to do that. And what's going to happen is, a lot of folks look on these developments in publishing as a barrier, and I think the best way to do it is look on it as an opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. It's when you hire somebody mainly because of identity, you do them a real disservice. And so I'll just tell a blunt story. I knew an actor, a guy who was offered a part, and it required that he do some shady stuff to get it. And he did it, and he got the part. And he told me, I don't know if I'm a good actor. I just know that I got this because I did this thing. And that plagued that guy for the rest of his time in Hollywood. He was a good actor. But he just couldn't get over the fact that the entree had been to do the thing that had nothing to do with acting.
It's like the Harvey Weinstein effect, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that stuff is what he had to do, but
no, it was just plain and simple. And it's done to women all the time. If you'll do this because you're pretty, but she's there because she wants to be an actress. Well, yeah, but you got to do this because you're hot. And then she spends the rest of her life wondering if she's a good actress. And that's why they go nutty. Guys too. So there's that. It's big publishing will stay alive because you will hear these words used. It's too big to fail. But
and they have back catalogs with really good books and really good authors that help fund these projects.
Yeah, but it's too big to fail. So the market is Amazon. We put, whether Jeff Bezos, I think Jeff does, because he's really into science fiction and things like that. It seems like a nice guy. But we made Amazon what it is, because what we did is we gave Amazon free content to lure people to the website. And so they picked up a Bigfoot detective story, and then they said, well, I might as well get some wet wipes and a compass, because I'm going to go out and find Bigfoot, and I better get some ramen and things like that. Like people go to Amazon, they get lured onto Amazon by free content, and then they buy stuff. And that's why it works.
It sounds like you just generated another business idea for Galaxy's Edge. Actually, the next book release, you should have some companion affiliates. Here's an expedition to whatever this moon. You're going to need these things. Yeah. All right. So with that, we're like way over on this one. So I appreciate your time, Nick, and we're definitely having you back, at least on Russia, and hopefully an episode on Brand.
Yeah.
All right, my friend.
Thank you,
Talk
sir.
to you soon.
That was wonderful.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.